This is Support is Sexy, episode 171, with Tiffany Dufu, author of Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less. Welcome to Support is Sexy. I'm your host, Elaine Fluker, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I interview inspiring women entrepreneurs who share their wins and their lessons to help you take your business and your life to the next level and create something sexy. Here we go. Hi everyone, happy Monday and welcome to a new episode of Support is Sexy. I'm so excited to have you here. You know, it just would not be the same without you. And I am so excited to have our first guest of the week, Miss Tiffany Dufu. And Tiffany is the author of a new fantastic book called Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less. Tiffany is also a woman after my own heart. She is very passionate about supporting and empowering women and girls. Her work, her career certainly reflects that. This book reflects that. She's also the Chief Leadership Officer at Levo League. She has a wonderful career of just really being about women, all for women. So I absolutely love it. And I know you're going to love this episode because she gives fantastic tips about how to drop the ball, something we are taught, especially as women, not to do. We're supposed to juggle everything, keep everything going, keep all of the balls in the air. Well, Tiffany talks about strategic, smart ways for you to drop the ball for your own health and for the relationships that you have with yourself, your family, your career, and much more. So on this episode, you'll learn from Tiffany how to get over the quote unquote goods and the shoulds, how to engineer your purpose, how to create what she calls a portfolio career, how to cultivate an ecosystem of support for your career. Tiffany gives really, really good advice in this episode about career strategy, how to get mentors, and how to get other support for your career. So make sure you listen out for that, whether it's your career or your business. Very smart advice. Also, the dangers of Lone Ranger syndrome, the truth about false delegation, the power of dropping the ball, how to have 3 important conversations, one with yourself, one with your family, and one with your colleagues. Also, how to negotiate what matters with your kids, how to delegate with joy. Yes, it is possible to let things go with joy. As we always say, what would this look like if it were easy? Tiffany talks about delegating with joy. She also shares her 4 go-tos for your career, why we sometimes waste time worrying about decisions that we don't even have to make. I'm guilty, so listen out for that. And lastly, the important difference between a sponsor and a mentor. So as I said, you're going to love this episode, chock full of information, great advice from Tiffany. Be sure to go to supportissexypodcast.com so you can see all of the resources that she mentions in here. Okay, so without further ado, Tiffany Dufu. So Tiffany, I'm so excited to have you here for an episode of Support is Sexy. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So first question, when did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
Many, many years ago, I was probably in the 3rd grade, and I figured out how to make these really beautiful barrettes with lace. I would basically take a little piece of lace and sew it together, and I would hot glue a button on top and paste a barrette on the back. And my mom thought they were really pretty and suggested that I try selling them at church, and I did, and people bought them for $1. I think I fell in love with entrepreneurship way back then.
Do you think that it sort of showed you this idea that I can make something and people will buy it from me?
Exactly. Or that I have value that can be, that can be monetized. And what's interesting is that later in my life and in my career, I became the product in a way. It came out of me. I didn't have to physically make a product. It was my thoughts. It was my ideas. It was my voice that people found valuable and that I could monetize. But that's certainly where the seed was planted.
Excellent. Now tell us, where did you grow up?
In Washington State. I'm from the Pacific Northwest.
What was a young Tiffany like?
She was very ambitious. She was, quote unquote, a good girl. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that, meaning that she knew what she wanted and she knew how to get it. But she also knew when what she wanted didn't matter.
What were the times that you felt like, or she felt like what she wanted didn't matter?
Oh, so many times. I mean, there's a point in this book that I've just written that I talk about when my father called me after my first year at Spelman to tell me that I needed to come home. And he couldn't afford to keep me down there. And Spelman had been my dream college. And I was so disappointed. But I'm the oldest daughter. And he needed me to come home so he could afford to send my younger sister to school. And even though I was so heartbroken during that phone call, I knew to say, Daddy, don't worry about it. I love you. It's not a problem. I'll come home.
When I read that story in your book, I really felt that. I haven't even experienced something like that, but you could really feel it, the way you described it, and just the feeling of the disappointment, or at least what I felt was a disappointment in having to leave the school of your dreams, but then also that feeling of obligation.
That's it.
Yeah. And is that part of the good girl thing that you talked about?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we all have roles in our lives that we play, and particularly women, I often start with girl or daughter because that's the first role that we often play. Mm-hmm. But we grow into being, sometimes sisters, certainly friends, students, workers, eventually maybe wives and mothers. And what I find in my interactions with women over the years is that we default to putting the word good in front of all of our roles. So it's not sufficient for us to be a daughter. We strive to be a good daughter and a good friend and a good sister and a good worker and a good student and a good wife and a good mother. And all of the goods in front of all of those roles means that we're often living off of an expectation, a job description that I find surprisingly universal, even though many of us grow up in different parts of the country with different values, different parents. We all seem to subscribe to these specific duties that are associated with these roles. If you're a mother, it's very important to be there for your child's first steps. That's like in the job description of a good mother. Mm-hmm. If you're a sister, especially if you're the oldest of 4 girls like me, you're required to respond to your sister's text messages within about 5 minutes. So, it's the pressure of us fulfilling all of these roles that is part of the reason why I wrote Drop the Ball.
Do you think it's our goods, as you said, a good girl, but also our shoulds? I feel like a lot of us get caught up on our shoulds too.
Oh, absolutely. And they go hand in hand, right? It's mm-hmm. the good, wife should do X, Y, or Z. The good student should do X, Y, or Z. And that's what really gets us in a pickle, in part because we imagine ourselves to be very forward-thinking, progressive, and I don't mean that in a political sense, just that we feel new age and very modern and very self-empowered in our decision making. But when you begin to explore those different roles and you ask yourself really 2 fundamental questions in relationship to any of them, the first being, what does a good X do? The second being, how do I know that that's what a good X does? You very quickly begin to unravel this thread of socialization from, well, that's what I saw my mom do or my aunties do, or that's what I saw on television. When I was growing up, I used to love watching The Cosby Show, mm-hmm. and I was going to be Claire Huxtable. Like, she was my role model. I was going to have perfectly feathered hair, right. Makeup, and I was going to waltz into a room and my outfit would be flowing behind me, and my house was going to be perfectly clean, and I was going to have 5 perfectly well-behaved children that were all college bound. And in the second season, she made partner at a law firm. Right. It wasn't until much later in my evolution that it occurred to me how ridiculous Claire Huxtable was as this, unrealistic expectation. But that's part of where we get those goods and those shoulds from, right?
Exactly. Now, one of the things that I know is very important to you, as you mentioned a little bit there, is just supporting and empowering women and girls. How did you go about aligning that passion for supporting women and girls with your career choices? Because you've had a very wonderful career of all these fantastic positions that really are within that space. But how did you align those 2 things to work for you?
Well, yeah, I mean, my life's work is advancing women and girls. That's pretty much why I'm on the planet. So my life is very simple. I already know what's on my tombstone, and I'm just kind of project managing my life backwards. Sometimes people ask about purpose, how do you find your purpose? I really feel like purpose can be engineered. It's simply a commitment that's inspired by experiences that you have. And I've certainly had some experiences that have inspired this commitment that I have. And so, to be honest with you, I really have always just been attracted to and kind of been led by either organizations or movements that I feel are doing great work advancing women and girls. And then I adjust my skill set and I adjust what I can contribute in order to help advance that goal. One of my first jobs early in my career was as a fundraiser for a school called Seattle Girls School, and it was the ground floor of the school. The building hadn't even been built yet when I joined as the founding team member. And I had not ever had a job formally raising money before, but I, did the best that I could, and we raised the first endowment that allowed that school to have a diverse population through its financial aid endowment. And really, after that, I did acquire that skill of being a fundraiser, and I did raise money when I went to Simmons College in Boston, but I eventually went into administration. I eventually ran a nonprofit organization. Right now, I work for a technology company. But at each one of the organizations, I've largely focused on what is my highest allegiance to. And my highest allegiance is to advancing women and girls. And how can I deploy my gifts, talents, skills, abilities in whatever way is going to do that? Right now, I have what I would call a portfolio career. I do 4 different things that help me to advance women and girls. One of them is as Chief Leadership Officer at Levo, which is a technology platform for millennial professionals to help them elevate their careers. The second part of my portfolio is as an entrepreneur. I'm a public speaker and I have a robust public speaking practice, and I spend lots of time with Fortune 500 companies helping them to figure out how they're going to retain and advance the women that they're losing in droves, which is what led to my third part of my portfolio, which is this book called Drop the Ball, because I really felt like I needed to support women more in answering this question of how do I manage it all and how do I fulfill my ambition and still create a life that I'm passionate about. And then the fourth part of my portfolio is my volunteerism. I volunteer for Girl Scouts of the USA. I'm on the board of Girls Who Code, and I spend quite a bit of time just supporting nonprofit organizations that I think are doing great work in the cause that I care about.
Excellent. I love that, Tiffany. So let me ask you, for young women who are listening, who may be in the earlier stages of their careers, do you think, one, what you said earlier, this idea of deciding what you're passionate about or your life's work, or maybe they're not at that point where they've decided that, but sort of looking at what you're all about first and then finding companies and positions, if you're able to, that align with that? Is that something that you suggest?
I would suggest, the first thing I would suggest, though, is to really shift your mindset, particularly if you're early in your career. We were always told if we just put our head down and did great work and achieved great results, we would be successful. And particularly in academia, that works. When you're in school, you get a 4.0 GPA, and that's what success means. But what I find is that often when we make that transition from being in school to being in the workplace, no one tells us that there's this whole other element of your leadership journey that involves it being a team sport, not just a solo endeavor. And so the first thing that I would always say is make sure that you're cultivating an ecosystem of support, not just for you professionally, but also for you personally. Because at the end of the day, I am just the cumulative investment of a lot of people who have opened doors for me. And I've gotten very good at figuring out how to run through them. But in part because I never felt that I had some of the capital that other people have. I didn't have parents that had what you might call the pedigree to be able to just introduce me to people. I didn't have an Ivy League degree behind my name. I always felt like what I did have were the people who were willing to send me opportunities, take their time to mentor me, to sponsor me. And so I think the most important thing that you can do is really spend time cultivating an ecosystem of support and making sure that you've got people in your life who can help provide cover and can help provide opportunity and can help you achieve clarity.
I love it. I'm all about it. Support is sexy.
That's it. That's it.
One of the things that you mentioned in your book, Drop the Ball, which we're going to dive into, but just since you just spoke about it now, is the Lone Ranger syndrome.
Yes.
Can you explain? You sort of wraps up what you just said, but can you explain a little bit about that and how that trips so many of us up as women, and especially successful women or ambitious and driven women?
Yes. So, the Lone Ranger syndrome manifests in a couple of different ways, depending upon if you're at home or if you're at work. Mm-hmm. At work, the Lone Ranger syndrome manifests in a belief in a false meritocracy. Basically, we go it alone at work thinking that, if I just hit my sales goal, or if I just nail this meeting, that everybody's going to notice and then I'm going to get promoted. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a false meritocracy because, of course, things like the relationships that you have with people and what's being said about you when you're not in the room giving the sales meeting or making, the sales goal, all is a part of who informs your brand, which is basically the conversation that people have about you and whether or not you're going to move forward. At home, the Lone Ranger syndrome manifests in this belief in a false efficiency. Basically, because we often have this other dynamic that I call HCD, which is home control disease, we really believe that it's more efficient for us to just do things ourselves, because a lot needs to get done and we want it to happen quickly as opposed to delegating to other people. Mm-hmm. But because we're always doing it ourselves, because we can do it better than anybody else in our house, we end up with everything on our list constantly. And so we end up not fulfilling really our biggest potential, both at home and at work, because we're relying so much on our own endeavor and our own work and not relying on other people and really engaging them in a meaningful way.
Another thing I believe you mentioned is this idea of sort of false delegation. You're not really delegating.
Yes, it's this dynamic that I call imaginary delegation that I found myself engaged in many times in my life. It's basically when you assign someone a task and you fully expect them to complete that task, and when they don't, you actually get annoyed or upset, but you never actually told them that you wanted them to complete the task. And then when common sense prevails a bit and you think to yourself, well, I never told them to take out the recycling, you snap back at common sense. Well, nobody ever has to tell me to do anything around here. Mm-hmm. And, the vicious cycle kind of continues. I know that no one who's listening to this is familiar with this dynamic.
Exactly. No one, not at all. For those other people.
Yes, exactly. But I found myself in this vicious cycle of imaginary delegation, which really gets in the way of asking for help.
And leads to another thing you mentioned in Drop the Ball is leading to a point of resentment in some cases.
Yes, I had enormous, and Drop the Ball, the relationship that I focus on, because it's a book and so you can't focus on all of your relationships, is my relationship with my husband at the time, and really helping to develop an all-in partnership with him. And in the book, one of the things that when I went back and, it's interesting writing a memoir because you're at a further point in history and in time, and you have to go back and conjure up the feelings and the memories in order to be able to write. And I talk about this stealth resentment. It's kind of like right underneath the surface, like a submarine. It just hovers there. And you think everything is fine until he asks a question like, where's the pacifier? And you spew out. It's a place where it always is. And I once had a mentor that I went to speak to because I was having such a difficult time in my life and in my relationship. And she said something that I'll never forget that I wrote about in the book, which is that resentment is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah. It's really powerful.
It's very powerful and it's very insidious. And I think one of the most difficult things in our lives to break, because resentment requires that you create this narrative, this story in which you're the heroine and someone else is, the villain. And in order to fuel your resentment, you have to keep telling yourself this story, which means that everything that somebody else does, their behaviors, the words that they say, you're looking at and framing through this lens of resentment, of this person being bad and you being good. And it's very, very damaging.
And I think the memoir piece of the story, too, just really pulls you in because in speaking about the resentment, there's also a part of us that tries to enroll other people in our madness, as I say. So in one point you say you were talking to a friend of yours and she was telling you how your husband had said something about something to celebrate you or told her something that you had just done. And instead of being like, oh, that was nice of him to share, you had a moment of, he's sharing my business, and went sort of through the spiral, right? And then she said, well, you can tell the story. I was very into that story, but she sort of had to call you on it. She's like, you're not enrolling me in that craziness.
Exactly. She said what she did. She said it. She did an even better way. She basically said, we wouldn't know about the good work that you're doing if it wasn't for him. Like, it's great that he's your personal PR agent,
right.
And if you need help from him, then you might want to ask for it. She says, I know that's not your thing, asking for help, but it sounds like you need it, which was, a bit of a quip that only a real friend
right.
can
where you're quiet for a second and you're thinking, she's right, but exactly. I hate her right now.
Yeah, exactly. And it was a very frustrating, because what she was supposed to do was she was supposed to
right.
start, talking bad about my husband. Like, she was supposed to enroll in my anger and in my frustration, but she refused to do it, which is really what real friends do.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So let's talk more about Drop the Ball, Achieving More by Doing Less, which just came out February 14th. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Now, I think that idea, I love the idea, but it goes counter to everything we're taught, as we talked about a little bit here, as quote unquote successful women. We're supposed to do it all, handle it all. It seems like everyone else is doing it all over social media and everywhere else. But tell us how you got to the point where you realized, okay, it's time to drop the ball.
Oh, absolutely. So I used to be a person who was terrified of dropping the ball, which is why I had to write a book called Drop the Ball. Mm-hmm. I really felt that it was important to perform flawlessly at home and at work. I felt it as many women do, but I particularly felt it as a woman of color and as a Black woman who had been racially socialized, because, of course, if I wasn't successful, it was going to be a ding on the entire Black race. Right. That, basically I carried on my shoulders every day when I walk in every room that I walked into. And I'm going to be honest, what happened wasn't that I decided to start dropping balls. What happened was that I was a hot mess. I became very overwhelmed. I was very stressed. It was a time in my life when I had just become a mother and couldn't quite figure out how I was going to do everything that I was doing at home and continue to do everything that I was doing at work. And I got to a point where I started doing the one thing that I was most terrified of in my life. I started dropping balls. Mm-hmm. And it was really messy. But this beautiful thing happened, which was I started dropping balls. And I discovered that the world doesn't fall apart when you drop them. Like, no one came to read me my Miranda rights because I hadn't paid the parking ticket. No friend called me to tell me she wasn't going to be my friend anymore because I missed her birthday party. And I kind of had these aha moments where I thought, you know what? I think I could start doing this on purpose. I think that this might be the key for me to be successful both at home and at work. And it was a journey, which is why I had to write a whole entire book about it. It was about a 3-year journey. Mm-hmm. And I hope that it doesn't have to take another woman so long, which is why I wrote the book. But that's really what happened. As I started dropping balls, I realized that the world doesn't fall apart when you do it. And I learned a lot about myself, but also about the people who are around me. And I really had to start questioning my assumptions about my performance, about why I thought that I should perform the way that I did. And really, in my relationship with my husband, which is kind of a central theme of the book, it's a bit of a romantic comedy, mm-hmm. Finding out that he actually did a lot of things better than me. And it was important for me personally, and it's part of the memoir, but it's also part of the manifesto of the book that, the public sphere has really benefited from the workforce revolution in which women went to work in droves. And now, companies and organizations really benefit from women's ingenuity and our talent and our creativity. But we didn't have this inverse revolution on the home front. And I really feel like our homes still have a lot to benefit from men's talent and their ingenuity and their creativity on the home front.
One of the things that you mentioned, I believe a statistic was something like 70% of the home duties women are still doing in most homes. It was a very high percentage. Like you said, women have gone to work, but the balance at home didn't change for a lot of women.
It's completely fascinating. One of the things that I had to admit in the process of writing this book, and part of the reason why it was so hard, is that I had this dirty feminist secret. Publicly, I was always advocating for women's non-traditional roles and how we needed to disrupt gender stereotypes. at work, but at home, I was on Stepford Wife autopilot. And literally, if you had have done an analysis of the household division of labor in my home early in my marriage, in 1997, it would have been the same division of labor as a couple in 1950. And even though we have made an enormous amount of progress, still the statistics show that women do the vast majority of caregiving, whether it's children, whether it's elder care, just in our communities, we still do the vast majority of it. And there's nothing wrong with caregiving. In fact, Anne-Marie Slaughter in her book, Unfinished Business, talks about the value of caregiving. What's challenging is when caregiving becomes such a big part of your bandwidth and your plate that it stifles your ambition in the public sphere. So literally what we have are women saying, you know what, I could be the CEO, but I'm looking at that job and it's a lot of work and I already have a lot of work. So I think I'm just going to stay right here.
So is dropping the ball not a matter of women saying, like you said, I'm not going to do the career or I'm not going to take the CEO position so that I can take care of home? Or is it a way for women who sort of want it all in their own way to be able to manage it all in a way that doesn't drive them insane? Or is it both?
When I talk about, I think it's both. I don't think it's either or. And, when I talk about dropping the ball, what I'm encouraging us to do is to let go of unrealistic expectations of doing it all. That really dropping the ball is about getting clear about what matters most to us. What matters most to you? And what is your highest and best use in achieving that? And how can you engage other people in your world in order to achieve what matters most to you? That's what I'm talking about, as opposed to the scary definition of dropping the ball, which means that you're a failure or that you're not fulfilling someone else's, responsibilities or expectations.
One of the things that you talked about too in the book, speaking of scary, was that I think you were talking to one of your mentees, a younger woman who maybe she had a career, hadn't yet started a family, but she was already having those fears about, oh, when I have a family, I'm not going to be able to balance it all and that kind of thing. And I think for all of us at all different ages, we get caught up in the fear of what might happen as opposed to thinking, how can I manage this? How can I focus on what matters to me at this point?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I talk a lot about traditional gender stereotypes.
Right.
And what I find fascinating is that all women feel this pressure. Even women that I know that are not in my situation, that are single, for example, or that don't have kids, still have to battle this expectation that something is wrong with them because they're supposed to, because all of us are supposed to, and have to manage these assumptions. For example, I speak with a lot of single women who don't have children who are really frustrated by this expectation that they should stay late, that they should work harder, that they don't have personal lives, right? And things that they would like to do because they're not the ones that necessarily have children. And I just find it so fascinating that we're all forced to deal with societal expectations that I'm really trying to disrupt with this book.
Excellent. Now, what I noticed as a thread throughout Drop the Ball is a need for some important conversations, which I think we all need to have in different ways. So what I wanted to ask you about was how to have these different conversations, starting with the one that we need to have with ourselves when we need to realize it's time to drop the ball. How do we have that conversation with ourselves?
So I think the first thing is to recognize, and I'm so glad that you're starting there because that really is the first conversation. I think the first step is acknowledging the voice that we need to have the conversation with. I think it's important for us to name that voice. It's the voice that says this morning, for example, you're not going to go to the gym again, right? I named my voice Cynthia. And this morning I said, Cynthia, I'm on a book tour. I've been working really hard trying to advance women and girls through this book. And you're not going to make me feel bad because I'm not going to the gym this morning. I'll go tomorrow, right? So I think that the first step is really identifying and recognizing that voice that you're hearing in your head, even though it may be your voice, that it came from other places and that it's often giving you messages that are counter to what you really need in order for you to thrive and for you to flourish and for you to name that voice and talk back to it. But I also think it's important for us to, in order to have that conversation with ourselves, we're going to have to start divorcing those roles that we were talking about and the performance of those roles from our value as human beings. I was really fortunate in that when I was growing up, my mom especially used to always say to me, Tiffany, you are so smart. You are so loved. You are so beautiful. And I'm embarrassed now that that used to annoy me to no end when I was a teenager, when my mother used to say this. But it's an important part of one of the voices that I've been indoctrinated with. So if Cynthia's not telling me, you know, that I'm a failure because I didn't go to the gym, I have this other alternative voice that's saying, Tiffany, no, you're very smart and you're beautiful and you're loved and you can do this. And I think building up those voices, affirming ourselves, and really understanding that we're valued regardless of what's going on around us and regardless of how we're able to perform, and surrounding ourselves with people who can whisper those sweet nothings in our ear as well is an important part of cultivating that conversation with ourselves.
I think that's so smart and so crucial what you just said, especially in that last part, is that for those who may not have had that, what you had from your mom when they were younger, surrounding yourself with people who can whisper those sweet nothings to you now is just as important.
Absolutely.
Instead of saying, I didn't get that and being dismissive of that idea.
That's right.
So in your book, you also mentioned the struggle for some of us to drop the ball because we were raised, as we mentioned, with these gender stereotypes or this idea that we adopted ourselves of doing it on our own. A lot of it is learned behavior. And as they say, you know, we teach people how to treat us by the way we treat ourselves.
That's right.
So how do we have the conversation with our loved ones, whether it's our husbands or even with our kids? How do we have the conversations with them like, okay, mommy is going to drop the ball a little bit? What does that look like? Or what did it look like for you?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I talk in the book about, or I write in the book about this concept called delegating with joy. And, you know, delegating with joy is essentially putting a task that you'd like someone to complete or help that you'd like to get from someone into a much more higher and meaningful context than what it really feels like in the moment. So you really start with your own journey. And I said to my husband, for example, or to other people in my life, you know, I've been feeling really stressed and overwhelmed lately. And there's a lot of things that I feel like I'm doing that isn't laddering up to what I've discovered matters the most to me, which in my case is advancing women and girls, nurturing a healthy relationship with my partner, and raising conscious global citizens. I feel like part of the reason why I'm stressed is because I have all this pressure to do all of these things. And I know that you're in my life in part because you want me to be my best self. And you've always been my biggest cheerleader and you've always supported me. And I was just wondering if you could take a couple of these little things off my plate, because I think that you doing so will make a huge difference. And I'm giving you this big speech right now. And when I tell you what they are, it's going to seem really insignificant. And you're going to wonder why I just didn't send you a text message. But could you take out the recycling and could you pick up the clothes from the dry cleaning?
Right.
And unless someone is a Neanderthal or a total jerk, which means you've got another issue for another podcast, right, the person's going to say yes. They're going to say yes. And that's how we reframe the conversation for all of us. And the reason why these conversations are so important is because once you begin to have them, you realize that your expectations of yourself were so far beyond the expectations that the people who love you had of you, right?
So and those people would love to help you in those cases.
Yes,
they're waiting to help you.
Yes. I remember having a conversation with one of my little sisters because I'm the oldest, and I was having a conversation about communication because I always feel this pressure to respond to my little sisters very quickly when they reach out to me. And I was letting her know that I wasn't sure that I was going to be able to do that anymore because, you know, sometimes I'm in a meeting, sometimes I'm on a stage, and she just started cracking up. She's like, it's okay, Tiffany. Like, you're my big sister. I already know that you love me. And if I don't hear from you for a couple days, I'm not going to think that you don't love me. Like, really, you really should like cut yourself some slack.
That's so funny. So like you said, it was an expectation you had on yourself. And she's like, girl, it's fine.
It's fine.
That is so funny. Now, what about the conversation? Or is there a conversation with your kids? Or is it just sort of showing them this is a new way of doing things? What did that look like for you?
Well, I think it depends on the age of your kids. You know, one of the things that is my highest and best use in raising conscious global citizens is engaging my kids in meaningful conversations each and every day. And those conversations at the beginning of the day usually start with, what kind of day would you like to have today? And they tell me, and then I tell them, that is the kind of day that you can create. You can choose to create that day for yourself. At the end of the day, we talk about the day that we created and the choices that we made and the people that we interacted with. Those are the kinds of conversations that I have with them. And, with kids as they grow older, my daughter is going to turn 8 soon. My son is 10. They start to have their own expectation and their own requests of you. So those become negotiations. I used to cook a lot and I don't do it as much as I used to. But one of the things my kids have negotiated is that I make scones for them on the weekends. And even when I'm traveling, I make the scones in advance and I freeze them so they have their fresh, baked scones. But that's something that's really important to them. So now there are 2 things that I have to do in order for me to feel like I'm a good mom. I have to engage my kids in meaningful conversations with them every day, and I need to make them scones on the weekends. But those are ensure that they have them on the weekend. But those are the intentional, deliberate conversations that we don't necessarily have that are so important in order for us to be successful.
And the scones are probably so important to your kids, but meanwhile, you may have been sort of killing yourself to do all of these other things. They're like, no, it's fine if we don't have that, but those scones, we need that on the weekend.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that I really had to check myself on was I used to spend a lot of time engaged in my kids' schools. And by the way, I'm not advocating that this is a ball that everybody should drop. But for me, one of the things I realized is that my kids really didn't appreciate as young children the amount of time or energy that I was spending on volunteerism, related to their schools. So, and I'll never forget one time there was a bake sale and I had volunteered to make an apple pie for the bake sale. And I stayed up half the night slaving over this apple pie. And in the morning, my family woke up, and I'll never forget my kids, they were just tall enough to peer over the kitchen counter, and they were staring at this apple pie. And I came out and I was like, nobody touched the pie. No one touched the pie. The pie is for the bake sale. And the look on my family's face when they were smelling this delicious apple pie, but it wasn't for them. They couldn't eat it. Was just this look of just sheer disappointment. And I thought to myself, why in the world would I do this? Why would I ever make an apple pie for anyone other than this delicious family, right?
Right.
Why did I stay up all night slaving when clearly that is not their priority? That's someone else's expectation, that says a good mom makes a fresh baked apple pie for the school bake sale. And that's a ball that I definitely can drop.
Oh, my goodness. Now, another place for the conversations, of course, is at work. So how do we have the conversation there, especially when we're in this position, whether it's a leadership position or if we're managing a team or something like that, we're always the dependable one at work. How do we have those conversations with people and not feel like slackers? And I know you had some great tips about some things we can try to sort of delegate or manage our time better at work.
Oh, absolutely. I have what I call my 4 go-tos that I'll talk about. But I think the conversations at work really need to center around sponsors and mentors, people who we're engaging. And I think that the conversations at work need to be explicit conversations about what we're trying to achieve at work. So, I'm at this company, I know that we have this vision of being the best XYZ company in the world. Here's what I've been contributing and what I feel like I can contribute in order to help us achieve that goal. In order for me to be able to do this, these are the resources that I feel like I need. These are the people that I feel like I need to be interacting with. This is who I think should be on my team. This is the budget that I think that I need. This is the time and the space that I think that I need in order to achieve that. And, can we start talking about a path for me to get those things in order for me to be successful, in order for to help us collectively hit the ball out of the ballpark. I think that's the way you frame the conversations at work. They're less about you in a way and more about what you're trying to achieve for a larger purpose, but being very intentional about what you need in order for that to happen. So you're not saying I'm going to drop the ball. You're saying here are the balls that I need, and here are the things that I don't think that I should be focused on. I think we should get other people to focus on in order for us all to achieve this larger goal.
Right. Making it about the company or about the mission or the project that you're working on.
Absolutely. And then just in terms of our sustainability and our success, one of the things that I realized once I had freed up some bandwidth at home from dropping some balls there was that I still needed a strategy for success at work. And my 4 go-tos are all about, number one, going to the gym or just really moving your body. It doesn't have to be going to the gym, but really making sure that you're creating sustainability for yourself. Going to lunch. So again, spending time outside of the office with people who you can engage in your leadership journey and in your success. Going to events, building your visibility, and really differentiating yourself in terms of your thought leadership or your platform. And then the 4th go-to is going to sleep, which was the hardest go-to of all.
Do you make sure you get a certain number, or do you have a goal of getting a certain number of hours each night?
8 hours. 8 hours a night. Yes.
Very good. I do 7.
After many years of getting, I'm ashamed to say, 4, at the most 5 hours of sleep a night for years.
And haven't you noticed quite a difference?
It's night and day. I was exhausted for 10 years and didn't even realize that I was walking around in this huge fog. It's changed my life.
I'm so glad that people are starting to talk more about sleep. Of course, Ariana has a book about sleep, but just the fact that people are starting to get away from that sort of sleep is the cousin of death kind of thing and looking at, no, sleep is actually a key to productivity as opposed to...
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that sleep used to be, it used to be a pride of honor. I'm ashamed to say it was almost like a testament of a good work ethic.
Right. I stayed up all night working on this.
I stayed up all night. Like that was a point, of pride. And it's just so sick and insidious because that's exactly what we need in order for us to be able to make good judgments and for us to change the world.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier, and I was going to ask you about, you mentioned this idea of knowing what's going to be on your tombstone and sort of project managing your life backwards from that. What are the words that you think would be, or what will be on your tombstone, and then how do you sort of manage your life back to that?
Well, my tombstone will say, she got to as many women as she could.
Mm-hmm.
And I project manage back from there by basically developing what I've called a compass. And in my case, it was a couple's compass. It was a set of questions that my husband and I created together. But you don't have to do it as a couple. Each one of us can create a compass. And it's basically a set of questions that we ask ourselves whenever we're at a crossroads, we have a decision to make, we're not quite sure where to go next. And they include questions like, will this advance women and girls, or will this advance sub-Saharan Africa, which is my husband's passion and purpose? Will this put us on a path to financial freedom? Is this in alignment with the values that our parents instilled in us? Would our descendants be proud of us if we said yes to this? And if the answer to all of those questions is yes, then we move forward and we figure out the logistics later. And the reason why I mentioned the compass in the context of answering this question about working backwards is because I found over and over again in my life that plans kind of fall apart. And they end up falling apart because this thing called life happens and gets in the way.
It just gets in the way.
Yeah. And so what I found is that even though I couldn't have told you 20 years ago that I'd be living in New York City, that I'd be chief leadership officer at Levo, that I'd be writing this book called Drop the Ball, I could have told you that I would be on track advancing women and girls. I could have told you that I'd be on a path to financial freedom. I could have told you that whatever I would be doing would be in perfect alignment with the values that my parents instilled in me, and that whatever I'd be doing, that if history books were written, that my descendants would be very proud of that. And that is how I know and that I feel certain that I'm kind of living it backwards.
I love that. Now, do you think there's a part of you that is so passionate about women and girls and being of a support to them, providing this fantastic book and all of the other work that you do because of who you were as a little girl, being very driven and ambitious and wanting to make things happen, but sort of having this period where you didn't feel like you necessarily had the support that you wanted during that time?
Oh, absolutely. It's also driven, in the book, I talk a little bit about my mom and my relationship with my mom. Mm-hmm. And, my mom really, she found out she was pregnant with me when she was 19. And she lived in Watts, LA at the time. It was a rough place. It was a rough time. And she wanted something other. And so she convinced my dad to join the military. That's why I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I was born at Fort Lewis Army Base in Tacoma, Washington. And my parents broke a cycle of addiction and poverty and violence in one generation based off of this fundamental truth that if you want something you've never had before, you're going to have to do something that you've never done before in order to get it.
Right.
My dad went to college on the GI Bill. He eventually earned a PhD in theology. When I was growing up, my dad was the pastor of churches, and he was a counselor. He stewarded the flock. My mom was a preacher's wife. And for the early part of my childhood, she didn't work outside. She's what I call a non-paid working mom, because all moms are working moms. And when my parents got divorced when I was 16, I learned that all of the economic, social capital that I thought was our family's really only belonged to our dad, because he was the one who had built this presence outside of the home. And unfortunately, I witnessed my mom spin back into that vicious cycle of poverty and addiction and violence after the divorce. And I spent many years trying to save my mom and support my mom because, of course, she had broken that cycle for me. So I didn't really understand what she was going through. And eventually, I came to a place where I realized, if you don't have this conviction, if you don't understand that you're the most powerful change agent in your own journey, no one else can do that for you. And I probably spend the vast majority of my waking hours just trying to get to as many women as I can as an expression of gratitude to my mom, who miraculously was able to instill this very strong notion in me, but for whom no one ever did it for her. So my life's work and my mission in that tombstone is really an amalgamation of gratitude that I have toward my mom.
I love that. Now, what does your support network look like now that you have evolved into this woman who knows when to drop the ball?
Oh, it's pretty extensive. So I have a network that includes mentors, both sage mentors, which are women who have been around the block a lot longer than I have, and I reach out to them on a regular basis, and they help me to achieve clarity through guidance and encouragement, largely through asking me really tough questions and reminding me about myself. Tiffany, we were at this point 4 years ago. I had a conversation with one of my sage mentors in which I was agonizing at one point about whether or not to apply for a job that would have taken me into another state. My family would have been uprooted. I was really anxious about it. And she says, Tiffany, I just want to tell you that I keep having this observation about you, which is that you're consistently worried about decisions that you don't even have to make. She said, you spend a lot of time expressing anxiety over circumstances that are completely outside of your control. She says, you're worried about this job. You haven't even applied for the job. She said, you don't even have a job offer. You have no decision to make. She said, I think that you should spend more of your energy funneling it into creating options for yourself, as opposed to spending that energy worrying about options that you don't even have. That's the kind of sage wisdom that, your sage mentors can give to you. I also have peer mentors. These are women who also help me to achieve clarity, but we also, it's very transactional, and they help hold me accountable for the commitments that I make to myself. Drop the Ball, the book itself, is largely the result of needling from one of my peer mentors, Reshma Sajani, who runs this organization called Girls Who Code. And I had declared my ambition to write a book to Reshma, some years ago. And for an entire year, every time I saw her, she would say, when are you going to write the book? When are you going to write the book? When's the book coming? And one day I got really frustrated and I said, you know what? I know that I said that a long time ago, but I don't have time to write a book. I've got the kids, I've got work, I've got all these other commitments. I just don't have time. And I'll never forget her looking at me and without batting an eye saying, I think chapter 1 should be why women don't have time to write books.
I love friends like that.
I just thought to myself, you know what? I better write this book because I don't think I'm ever going to hear the end of it.
Right. She's never going to let it go.
If I don't, I have sponsors, people who at very critical times in my life have basically laid their body on the table and said, she's going to get the promotion or she's going to get the opportunity. One of those people is a woman named Marie Wilson, who built the Ms. Foundation for Women. She started Take Our Daughters to Work Day. She founded the White House Project. And when she retired, she ensured that I was her successor, in that role of being president of the White House Project. I've got my mentees who help keep me relevant and who really support me in all kinds of ways, whether it's through research, through fashion. Sometimes they help babysit for me. I've got people who are, my family. And when I talk about family, for me, family is the people in your life who you can ask things of and you don't feel like you're imposing on them. That's my family. There are some people that I'm related to by blood. I call those relatives because it's not always true that your relatives fall in the category of family, depending upon how, your life and your relatives operate. But certainly, for example, I just was on the Seattle leg of my book tour, and I reached out to one of my dear friends and sorority sisters, Toya Taylor, who I feel like her home, she lives with her mother, and I just feel like their home is like practically a bed and breakfast, and she gave up her bed and she cooked for me every morning. And it never occurred to me, Tiffany, like you kicked Toya out of her bed and you're imposing on them, by
it's
being
family.
It's family. It's family. And we all need, if our relatives are not family, we've got to curate family in some way, shape, or form. I have people that I call my specialists. These are people who long before, there was a point in my career where I just didn't have the monetary resources to afford things like travel agents or attorneys, But I would always go to people who specialized in things that could help me to shortcut either research or things that I was just trying to do in my life. And I would ask them for help and support with basically one question, which is, if you were trying to, take this trip or get your car fixed or find a good school for your kid, how would you go about doing it? And using their expertise in order to help me be successful. I could go on and on. I have so many people that have contributed to my success and that I rely on. And I think it's so important for all of us to do it.
And I love that you have these different segments of your support network that people fall into, whether you place them there or they naturally fall into it like family.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes people need to be recruited too.
That's right. Enroll people in your vision. One of the groups or the segments that you mentioned was the sponsor. So tell us quickly what you think about the difference between a mentor and a sponsor for you.
A mentor's highest value is in what they say to you when you're in the room with them. So mentors are people who you communicate with one-on-one. They ask you questions. They know the good, the bad, and the ugly. You're going to dish it out to them because they're going to give you feedback. And hopefully you're going to maintain a relationship with mentors because they can identify your habits and your patterns, and they can feed that back to you, just like my mentor did to me in that scenario that I spoke to you about. Sponsors, their highest value is in what they say to other people about you when you're not even in the room. Sponsors don't need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. In fact, it's best that sponsors just know that you're a superstar. So they need to know what your goals are so that when the meeting is happening and you're not there, they can say, you know what, I really think that Elaine needs this promotion. I really want to move her forward, or I really think we need to give her this deal. But there are people, they're clutch people that come in at very key moments. I've had 3 or 4 sponsors in my career that have been very important for me. But they're different because a sponsor, you really need to make sure that you deliver for because they're staking usually their political, their social, and sometimes even their economic capital on the line in order to endorse you publicly. And it's very, very important that you deliver and that you hit it out of the ballpark for them because your brand and their brand can be heavily associated with each other. Mentors, if you don't listen to a mentor, nobody's going to know.
Right.
So mentors are people who you're really relying on to help dish it out for you and really help speak their truth to you to help you on your journey.
Excellent. An important distinction. Great. Thank you for sharing that. So just a few more questions. What would you say entrepreneurship has taught you about yourself as a woman?
That I have value that people will pay for. that what I have to give the world is so valuable and so important that people will exchange goods for it, that they'll give me money for it. I think it's so important because often as women, we're able to make an argument for why people should invest in everything, right? In our company, in our project, in our nonprofit organization, in our school, in our children, in our sisters, in our brothers. And the last investment argument that we often can make is why someone should invest in us. And I think that one of the most powerful things that entrepreneurship does is it forces you to develop that argument. It forces you to develop a case, a pitch for why someone should invest in you. And quite frankly, I feel like if every woman could articulate with passion a compelling case to anyone who walked up to her why they should invest in her, we could change the world.
Absolutely. Now, if you think over your life and career and you had the chance to thank only one person whose support was critical to you personally or professionally, who would that be and what would you say?
Only one person?
Only one person, Tiffany.
Oh, that's so hard.
That's because you have such a great support network.
Because, yes, exactly, because there are so many people. But because we're on the topic of this book, the person who I think I would have to name is Marie C. Wilson, who I named before. And that's in large part because she's my political mother and because her sponsorship of me has really allowed me to have a network and an ecosystem that has gotten behind this book in a very powerful way. So without Marie, I wouldn't know Gloria Steinem, who I call Auntie Gloria, who wrote the foreword to the book. I wouldn't know Sheryl Sandberg, who's invested and is a huge supporter of the book. I wouldn't have had access to Anne Marie Slaughter, who also read the book and blurbed it and is a huge. So Marie is kind of the key, if there was a center of a spoke and there were all of these, other pieces of it, Marie is definitely the center of that in the context of my feminism and the world of women. And I'd have to nod my head to her.
Excellent. So tell us now how we can support you. I will have links for people to buy the book, of course. I actually spoke to a young woman today, L'Oreal, she interviewed me some time ago, and I've met her online and that kind of thing. And she talked about this woman, Tiffany Dufu, who wrote this book called Drop the Ball. It looks really good. I'm going to buy it. She just bought your book. And she's like, I think you should interview her. I said, perfect. I'm talking to her at 2:00 today. So there are women. It was so fun. She was like, oh my God, I can't wait to hear it. This was all via email, so I'm expressing what I think she sounded like. But it's so amazing. So there are women out there, young women, all women, old women like myself, who are so happy that you wrote this book and so proud of you. So just tell us all where we can find it and where we can find you.
Please go to droptheball.com. You can also go to tiffanydufu.com. It's going to take you to the same place. I need everyone to buy this book. It's very rare, particularly as a woman of color, for us to publish books, for us to get significant book deals, and for us to write books that can appeal to a broader segment of people. And so, this book is an experiment in that, and I really want it to do well because I want to help open the door and open the floodgates for other women to get book deals. And this book is important to me for that reason. So please go buy it, tell other people about it. If you have to drop the ball on reading it, okay. But I still would love you to buy it. And if you do read it and you enjoy it, please go to Amazon and give me a review, contribute a review on Amazon.
Absolutely. And I think it's a great book for everyone listening, for, as you said, sororities or groups or other women's groups, just to get for everyone to be able to read and discuss and really sort of it's a mindset shift around how we do things and still be able to be successful, but thinking about it in a new way as opposed to our shoulds and good girl behavior.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your leadership, too.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Such a joy to talk to you. Now, before you go, what's a parting piece of advice from you to our listeners about anything?
I would go back to what I said in the beginning, which is that if you want something you've never had before, you're going to have to do something that you've never done before in order to get it.
Excellent. Tiffany Dufu, hold on one second. All right, so thank you so much for listening to that episode with Tiffany Dufu. Now, was that or was that not as promised? Full of information and incredible resources. To get more of that, go to supportissexypodcast.com so you can see links to everything that Tiffany mentions in this episode, a lot of the women that she mentions, as well as some of the books that she mentions. Supportissexypodcast.com. And while you're there, be sure to go to the top, click subscribe so you can subscribe to our email list so you don't miss an episode or any of the other wonderful things that we have coming up in 2017. It's going to be a good year. Claim it. All right. Thank you as always for listening. I truly appreciate you. Go out and buy Tiffany's book, or go out. I guess you don't have to go out anymore, right? Go to Amazon or wherever you go to buy Tiffany's book. Let's be sure to support. It's a great book. I have read it. And it is so important for us to support work that is all about empowering women, work that we agree with. And I'm sure all of you can in some way agree with a lot of the things, a lot of the advice that Tiffany is giving here. It's really a great book. Drop the ball, achieving more by doing less. I love it, of course, because I'm all about support being sexy, especially the support that we give ourselves. And remember to support ourselves by doing the things that are essential for us, including sometimes dropping the ball. All right. Thank you again so much for listening. I truly appreciate you. And now you know what to do. Go out there and create something sexy. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.